I'm so delighted to welcome Carly Ferguson, leadership and career elevation coach, to today's episode of I Am, I Have. Carly and I are going to be talking about toxic workplaces, getting stuck in a career rut, and what it is about this new thing, the Great Resignation. Welcome, Carly.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming back on again. Now, we spoke, I think, while we were still in lockdown. A lot has changed since then, but let's start with your role and how your role might have changed and what you do to help people.
As my title says, I help my clients to elevate to a new level in their careers by helping them to access their full potential, to remove self-doubt and return to the way that they were meant to perform as a unique individual. Most people think that in order to be successful, they have to fix all of the things about them that they think are weaknesses. The truth is the things that you think are your weaknesses are your greatest superpowers. So that's really at the heart of what I help my clients to remember about themselves. And, thinking about what's changed since we last spoke, I really think and feel that this time spent away from the office has really allowed people to return back to their most authentic selves. Being away from other people in the office has really given people that space and time to think their own thoughts and feel their own feelings, which has really affected some of the decisions that are being made around their careers. So yeah, I guess that's been the biggest change that I've seen since we last spoke with my clients.
I mean, that's an epic change, isn't it? People going back to the workplace, this new idea of hybrid. I mean, it's not new, but it's much more prevalent now. Hybrid workplaces, a real change in the way we're thinking about how we work moving forward. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is because we've seen a lot of searches on Life Coach Directory for thoughts about careers moving forward, and some of them indicate that there's a level of dissatisfaction when people are returning back to what was perhaps the normal way of working beforehand. So one of the phrases that we're hearing again and again is toxic workplace. And I wondered if you could explain to me what the phrase toxic workplace means to you.
For me, a toxic workplace is really any work environment. It doesn't even have to be an office, does it? There are so many different workplaces. It's any kind of work environment that has a detrimental effect on its employees. So that could be their performance and productivity, or physical, mental, spiritual health, well-being and happiness. I don't think that it necessarily, I guess this is just a kind of a personal feeling, is that a toxic workplace isn't the same for everybody. It can be toxic to one person and not to another. And one of the ways I guess I try to explain this is if we think about toxins in our food or our water. Some people are going to be more affected by this than others. So if you're very sensitive, it's going to affect you immediately. But for others, it might take a long time for it to really show an effect when that person gets sick or it affects their health. I think it really does affect on your own physical, spiritual and emotional health as to how you are affected by that toxic environment. I don't know if you've heard the kind of the phrase that someone has like a strong constitution.
Yes.
When you go on holiday to somewhere where perhaps the water's a bit dodgy and some people get sick almost immediately and some people are fine. So I liken it to that. But essentially having a strong constitution means that a person of strong mind and body that has this groundedness, centeredness about them from a stable core and foundation, that just means that it's harder to rock those people. They're not as easily affected necessarily by the environment that they're in. So I think that's just an important thing to note, is that you might feel like you're more affected by the environment that you're in than other people and start to wonder why, or think that there's something wrong with you. And, for most people, it's unavoidable being in a toxic workplace or dealing with a toxic colleague or a toxic situation. So for me, the question really is how can you prepare for it? Because it's inevitable.
Of course, I mean, in life, we will meet people in situations that we're not used to, that might go against our values. And one of the really interesting things you said there was what's toxic for one person might not be toxic for another person. Now, we know there will be examples of toxic workplaces where it's endemic. And we might have read about that in the media, certain institutions, perhaps where we know that there's behaviours and that is a toxic workplace. But if you are feeling that your work circumstances are toxic, that might not necessarily be the whole situation. It might be the relationship that you are having with that workplace.
Yes, absolutely. And obviously, you can only have a toxic workplace if there are toxic behaviors from people, whether that be from the leadership down or in a particular team. And it can show up in so many different forms. Like you just said as well, that what I'm affected by might be differently to what you're affected by.
And teams, if you work somewhere where there are different teams, perhaps some people are customer facing, let's say, some people are perhaps more behind the scenes, there will be different circumstances that they're facing every single day, won't there?
Absolutely. Yeah, there is no one size fits all for anything really in the workplace. And I also think that something that I've really learned over the years is to honor the different ways that other people work as well. So we all have this manual of how people are supposed to behave, which is the same as how we would behave in a situation. But everyone has their own manual. They've got their own life experiences, their own insecurities. Something I personally have tried to do is really try to not put everyone in the same box. Just because somebody prefers to be a lone wolf and work on their own doesn't mean that has to affect me. That might just be the way that they work. It doesn't have any particular reflection on me as an individual or me as a colleague. So really just starting to honor the different approaches that people have and their own personal circumstances.
I love that phrase. Honor the different approaches. I think that's great. But I can imagine if someone's listening to this and they already feel like they're in a toxic workplace and they are perhaps at that point where it is really spilling out into the rest of their life, what are some of the things that they can do to look at that, to support themselves?
I mean, obviously the obvious suggestions are, speak up, find a new job, talk to your boss, talk to HR. And, those are all things that you can do or should do, especially if it is very, very toxic and, you're in a very difficult situation. But leaving doesn't necessarily fix the situation. Wherever you go, there you are. So often I'll find that people are experiencing the same thing over and over again at different jobs. So leaving isn't always the answer. Also, you might really love your job. And I was thinking, as I was thinking about our conversation earlier, I had, in my early 20s, I had my dream job. I was working in television and I got a job on a TV series that I dreamt of working on as a child. And when I got there, I found myself in a toxic work environment. It involved, some bullying and some kind of being left out of things. And I couldn't handle it. So I left. So I left this dream job that I'd manifested for myself. And really, I wasn't strong enough to handle the environment. So going back to what I said earlier on, I wasn't physically, emotionally strong enough to handle the what was going on in that environment. So in answer to your question, kind of what can you do if you found yourself in that situation? I was crying in the toilets every day. I was, it was pretty distressing. So in hindsight, if I was in that same situation now, I would deal with it very differently based on my experience and the tools that I now have to approach that. And really, as hard as it sounds, because it means you have to take responsibility for yourself, you have to work on your nervous system. You need to get to a point where you can handle the situation. And for me personally, and with my clients, that starts with strengthening your nervous system, your glandular system. That can be through practicing yoga, any kind of exercise that strengthens your core and so you have a strong navel. So the navel is your kind of power center. So it gives you that ability to stand up for yourself, to be able to handle difficult situations. For me personally, I practice Kundalini yoga, but there are, multiple other yoga sit-ups and things like this. And I know this might sound like really strange advice to give, to give someone, but these are the things and the tools that I found personally myself to really help me handle those toxic environments or toxic situations. So things like that. Breath work for me has been, hugely helpful. Cold showers, cold water swimming, all of these things, they just really help build this nervous system that's going to help you handle with emotional situations that might be challenging. So I know, again, this might sound like a really random thing to suggest, but often when we're in these situations and we're feeling emotional and stressed, we reach for the sugar, the caffeine, the alcohol.
Yes.
Yeah. And, and again, those things they're like buffers to, if you almost think, when you go bowling and you might put the sides down on the bowling alley, so to help you kind of get through the game so that you don't keep losing the ball. I liken it to that. So whatever strategies you've put in place to handle this like toxic work environment, they're keeping you stuck where you are. So really removing all of the negative buffers that you're creating to kind of pad yourself from the situation. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about, kind of strengthening from the navel and your core and the breath work, is that ability to go inwards slightly and feel that strength and pause. Yeah. When you feel the wave of emotion in a toxic workplace. Like you, I had an experience in my 20s where it was overwhelming, and I really recognize the idea of almost self-medicating with caffeine or alcohol or sugar. And when I think back to that period of time, if I think about my physical self, I feel a slump. It was almost like it was physically weighing me down. That job was physically weighing me down. And I think if I had more outside of work to support myself, if I'd got more balance and more strength, not in terms of mental strength, but just the ability to step back, those tools, I think that could have been really helpful. And one thing I just want to add is, if you're listening to this and you're right in the middle of it, that can feel really hard. That can feel like the biggest mountain to climb to kind of find that resilience. So if you are at that place, you need to look at some of the perhaps more immediate supports, such as speaking to a counsellor. If you've got an employee assistance program, talking to them, really getting that help and starting to talk, because there are lots of phases of being within this toxic workplace. And if you're at the most acute moment, get the help you might need for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been times when I haven't, in the past, when I haven't spoken to somebody, and I wish that I had. So these other tools are kind of really just to add to that, talking to someone. And yeah, that, as you mentioned, kind of, I remember how many, lattes and croissants I used to eat, on my breaks to kind of just buffer the day. So, for me, that kind of the exercise and the diet is really going to kind of support you. But this is very long term. These are things that we don't do just kind of as a short term fix. They're really kind of long term to help support you in these kind of environments, because like I said, they're everywhere. There's always going to be moments of challenge. The other piece really is to get really curious. So they say that kind of relationship is the greatest yoga, but in my opinion, kind of the workplace is also a great place to learn a lot about yourself, and really getting curious as to why certain situations are triggering you, why people are triggering you, what the underlying fear of is when these kind of feelings come up. And that's kind of, I was then going to work on to kind of thought work, speaking to somebody, really trying to get to grips with the thoughts that you're thinking that are creating the feelings, and how to really shift and change some of that. Work is a really great place to explore and work through your own issues and insecurities as well. Really getting clear as to kind of talking to someone, getting curious about your thoughts and feelings around the situation. Being a witness rather than a player has been a key one for me as well. As if you're someone that feels a lot of other people's emotions and fears, and you're someone, so if you identify as someone who's an empath, so you're picking up on the fears and insecurities and emotions of everyone that you're working with, especially when it's it really has become a collective toxic work environment and you're not the only one feeling it. That's your gift, that empath, ability that you have to pick up on that is part of your gift, but it's learning how to be a witness rather than a player to what's going on. Those are kind of a few of the things that have really helped me and my clients to manage themselves in these situations.
I think that being a witness and not a player is really important, because you can get a collective negative energy that just starts to build unless you stop and stand back from that. And that's something I wanted to come to, which is it can be hard, can't it, to think about how am I contributing to what I feel is a toxic situation in this workplace? What role am I playing? And how can I change that? And as we discussed, it might be that it's something that we have to step back from. But if it's somewhere we want to stay, and if it's a pattern that we're seeing again and again, how do we look at that? How do we look at that role that we might be playing? And perhaps it could even be a bit of a blind spot for us.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you've asked this question, because I think we often think of toxicity as like aggressive behavior, bullying, power playing, manipulation. We think of all those kind of the real heavy energy of like toxicity, but it can also be excessive gossip or drama. Or if you are someone that's got a lot going on emotionally, I've definitely played my part in this and been guilty of this, of treating work colleagues like therapists and bringing all of our problems in and just getting involved in all of the drama and the gossip and all of that kind of stuff. If your own behavior is affecting yours and others' productivity and performance, then you're playing a part in the toxicity of an environment. If you're wasting time and energy talking about others' misfailings or the leadership's misfailings, or like we've all done it, we see things that could be done differently. We see how the leadership team is affecting like this and that and how things, but the more we're just talking about it over and over again, we're not performing to the best of our ability. We're wasting energy on things that we can't necessarily change. I think really it's, can you accept things the way they are and just show up as your best self regardless, and start to, as I said before, start to see your colleagues as other humans dealing with their own challenges and experiences and insecurities the best way that they know how, because that toxicity just shows up so differently. And we often think that our part in it is, or we, like you said, we don't see our part in it, but it's certainly there. It just might look different to what you view as toxicity.
From a previous career, I remember this phrase of sphere of influence. And quite often it's very easy to look at perhaps a leadership team, if it's a really big organization, and feel everything that they're doing wrong because they're not able to see what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. The truth is we don't necessarily know what they know, as they don't know what we know. But what we can do is work within the sphere of our influence. So that is, as you said, having boundaries about that, cliquiness or gossiping or damaging other people's productivity. I think working with the area that you have control over can be a positive thing too.
Yeah. And you can end up in like a codependent work relationship with somebody where you're literally just winding each other up and making things worse. I had an experience again in a previous organization many years ago where it was a toxic work environment that I felt I was in. And, I was struggling. I had a colleague on the other side of the pond that was also having the same challenges. And we would speak to each other every day and waste so much time moaning with each other. And it was very codependent. It was this, we were just winding each other up every time we spoke. And looking back, it was such a waste of energy for both of us. So, I think we've all been guilty of it.
Well, thank you for that around toxic workplace. And we're going to move on to a slightly different subject, which is the other one we're seeing a lot of searches for, which is getting stuck in a career rut. So I guess a lot of us have been on hold while we've been in lockdown. We've been doing our jobs to the best of the ability. We've come out the other side and maybe we feel a certain amount of gratitude for still having the job, because a lot of people lost their jobs, but actually maybe we've got into a groove. What can it feel like if you're stuck in a rut, and how can that play out?
Many of us we can go through our careers just unconsciously, just letting things happen to us rather than taking like full control over what happens to us. You can grow where you are. And I think a lot of a lot of us put a lot of expectation on the company that we're working for playing a huge role in our career progression, and we can sit in that kind of victim mode as if everything's happening to us. We're not getting the promotion that we feel we deserve. We're not progressing in the way that we would like. And the truth is that we if we take some responsibility and control over it, we can, we don't necessarily need a new job. There are always opportunities to grow right where we are. And I think, you need to start, in order to make those changes. And if you want to, you're really serious about elevating in your career, you have to be willing to make radical changes, take risks, possibly fail, invest in your own professional development rather than waiting for the organization that you're working for to pay for it for you. I definitely have seen a huge kind of progression in my own career when I started investing in myself and stopped waiting for the training that the company I was working for was going to offer me. For me, it's really just, really starting to take responsibility and looking ahead and going, what kind of legacy do I want to leave behind? What do I want to have a greater experience of? And really just start asking yourself some really kind of serious questions and be willing to take some risks.
That's such a good point about investing in yourself. And obviously, if finances are difficult, there are other ways to do that, in terms of libraries and books, online courses. We have Life Coach Directory, which has a huge amount of information about life coaches and articles by life coaches. But you're right, we have to invest in ourselves as well as the company that we work for, because it's quite probable we won't be with that company for the whole of our life, or we won't want to be with that company for the whole of our lives, but we will be with ourselves.
That's not to say that companies shouldn't be investing in their employees. They absolutely should. But when budgets get cut, often the first place it goes from is, people development, and you can't rely on it. It can be great if you're getting that support from your employer, but it might not also be the kind of professional development or training in the area that you personally want to work on. And like you said, there are so many, there's so much content on, like free content on YouTube and low cost workshops and classes, or a book to read. That there's somewhere to start at your level.
Yes.
For me, it's just really taking responsibility for your own growth, and just having that growth mindset. Like I said, there are opportunities all around us in the workplace. We can speak up and say, I want to run that project, or I've got an idea here, or whatever that looks like. It's just about taking responsibility and kind of taking ownership of the next level for your career.
I love it, Carly. I'm feeling energized by this conversation. I'm feeling like I need to go and do things after our call. So let's go back to the person who is right in the middle of that rut. As we were talking about before, someone who feels that they're at the really acute point of being in a toxic workplace, and it feels like a huge hill to climb for it to get better. What can that person do who really feels like they are in a complete rut?
One of the first things, and again, I know some of my answers will not be necessarily the practical kind of next step advice that you can do, but really spending some time alone in silence every day. Most of us don't create space for our own thoughts and feelings. We're just kind of busy all the time. We're in the hustle. We're, again, numbing out in the evening with Netflix and whatever it is, to kind of numb the pain of how we're feeling, the dissatisfaction, the unfulfillment, all of those things. So one of the first things I always get my clients to do if they're lacking clarity or they're not sure what they want, in most cases, we always know what we want. We just aren't trusting ourselves, or we're not listening to ourselves or giving ourselves that space. So spending some time alone in silence every day, whether that's walking in nature, meditating, whatever that looks like, to just help gain some clarity as to kind of what it is that you truly desire and want, rather than listening to everyone else's thoughts and opinions about what you should do. So that would be my first one. If you're someone that likes writing as well, I don't know if you've come across the Artist's Way, where you do morning pages.
Yeah.
That can be another great way to just start exploring your thoughts and feelings about a situation, because you just have that stream of consciousness. So the Artist's Way is a book, and you follow the program, It's not personally for me. I might scribble notes, but I work better in kind of meditation and things like that. But you just end up you just write pages and pages in the morning, or you just write continuously. I think it's for 15 minutes, whatever comes to mind. And it can be amazing what you learn about yourself.
First thing in the morning as well, when
Yeah.
nothing else. So don't look at your phone, but first thing in the morning, the things that will come out when you've rested are quite different to what it might be, you know, on the train on the way home at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's just kind of when you're in that rut and you're stuck, and you don't often in that point you don't know what to do. That's the biggest thing, is I don't have clarity. I know that I want something to change, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know what the best next step is, and I don't know how to get out of this situation, because you can't see the wood for the trees. You might have responsibilities, you might have the mortgage or the kids or all of these things, and it can be really difficult to think outside the box when you don't have that that space or a sounding board. So you've mentioned already kind of the life coach directory and the counselling piece, talking to someone, but whether it's someone professionally or it's a friend, talking to someone that has no judgment as to what, or has no personal investment into the decision that you make.
Yes.
Because everyone will have, you know, we all have our own fears and we can project those onto other people. So you might be ready to take a risk with your career, but if you share that with a friend who's more risk adverse, that can very easily, you know, to affect your decision. Absolutely. So that's why I think spending time on your own, really exploring your thoughts and feelings, whether that's written or just through thoughts, those are two really good places to start. And the other one would be, again, is to, and this is a piece of advice that was given to me once when I was in a real kind of career rut and didn't have that clarity, was to look at where you can experience more joy and pleasure in your life. So sometimes the best way to come up with, the best way to fix a problem in one area is to stop focusing on it and to look at where we can experience more joy and pleasure in other areas of our lives. If you're feeling burnt out or tired or stressed or doubtful, afraid, unsure, whatever, all those feelings, sometimes the best thing you can do is to stop focusing on the job. A lot of us have a lot of our identity wrapped up in work, and it feels like the end of the world, that things are not going the way that we would like in our career. For me, I've found with myself and my clients that the moment we take our focus off of it and we start exploring new hobbies or working on our friendships or our personal kind of our loved ones and relationships or our pets that we're completely neglecting, just taking the pressure off a little bit and focusing on having more of that in our lives, I think can just free you up a little bit and give you some energy to then think differently.
There's so much in that. And I think it is the unfortunate universal truth that nothing will change unless you make steps to change it. And there are people that can help, but it does start with you, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. And I've written an article on this, that many of us are addicted to feeling overwhelmed, and we actually create a lot of the busyness and the lack of time for ourselves. You know, it goes back to getting really honest with ourselves, like, where are we playing a part in this? You know, like you said, that, you know, can I spare just 60 seconds, just starting really small, 60 seconds before I get out of the car, where I just take a few deep breaths and things like this. And it's that changing those behaviors that we've become so addicted to.
And here's the hard one, looking at your social media usage. And I'm saying that from my point of view completely, nobody else, no judgment. But I will say I'm on social media because I use it for work. I don't need to be on social media as much as I am. I could have read a number of books this year already if I'd have put social media down. So it is that blind spot that we all have, and that perhaps we don't really want to address. That I think if we're stuck in a rut, it's good to be really honest. And if you find that hard, and you can, engaging a life coach and talking to someone who will maybe help to hold you accountable as well, or at least have that regular check-in.
Yeah. And, you know, when you mentioned before as well about getting, what steps do you need to take? The reason I share those steps rather than the practical, right, we need to work out what you like about your job, what you don't like about job, what your values are. We need to, I see so many people jump straight into, especially when they've maybe just gone through a redundancy or they've left their job and they're looking for their next job. It's like, right, straight into the job search. And when we do that, we just rebound from one bad situation into another. And that's why I'm sharing real simple advice, which is spend some time in silence, really take some time to get all your thoughts down. Yeah. Because the clarity is going to come from the space, not from the busy doing. All of that other stuff, investigating. And I see this with my coaching clients. They're always surprised that for the first few sessions, we focus on things that they wouldn't have imagined. They thought they were going to get straight down to sorting their LinkedIn out or their CV or whatever. And it's like, no, we've got to do some exploring first. So yeah, I hope that advice was helpful.
I think it's really helpful, and it's key to not replace one type of overwhelm with another type of overwhelm, the overwhelm of trying to work out what I'm going to do next before you've worked out where you really are. So no, that's wonderful. And one final thing. So we've heard a lot of talk about the Great Resignation. And as a life coach, I wondered whether this is something you've seen within your clients, or perhaps this is just a trend that's come as a result of people going back to workplaces and actually, as you said at the very beginning of the podcast, having spent some time thinking about how they want to spend their days and where they want to work.
I definitely think it's a result of people being able to step back and have that time and space to think about what they really want to do. And I think, there's people have had a taste of freedom. They've had a taste of what it feels like to be more in control of their working day and their own unique, natural working style. And when we're together as a group, and I use human design with my clients. I don't know if you've come across human design at all, but it's the study of our energetic auras. And when you have 16 people or more, it's called what they call a WA. And when that happens, you end up with one person will automatically become the alpha and the leader. And then everyone starts to lose their individualism and becomes this homogenized group where we just follow the leader and we kind of relinquish responsibility to that person that's in charge. And I think what's happened is we've all been working on our own in our own homes. We've been able to come back out of the space of everyone else's energy fields. We've had this opportunity to come back to ourselves and really get to know ourselves on a really deep level. And we don't want to go back to losing that individualism and being able to have more control and feel more empowered, I think. I also think there's, the Gen Xers and that they're going to completely change the way that we work, I believe. I don't think we're going back to the way that things were before. And I think that's a really good thing. The machine and the hustle and the work culture, I think there's much more efficient ways for us to work. And we're going to start seeing these old work paradigms and systems fall down and new ones be built, which are going to be healthier for all of us. So that's my take on the Great Resignation.
I mean, that's a fantastic place to finish. And one of the things I wanted to say is you've just talked about human design, and I follow you across social media. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. Can you share where people can find you so that they can hear more about human design and also maybe get in touch if they want to talk to you more?
You can find me. I talk mostly about human design on my Instagram. So Carly Ferguson Coaching on Instagram, LinkedIn for all things kind of career elevation and leadership. Or you can visit my website, which is carly-ferguson.com, and sign up to my newsletter, where I share lots of thoughts and any kind of workshops and programs that I've got coming up.
Carly, I've loved talking to you today. Thank you. You were just the uplifting voice we needed for some really heavy topics, actually. So we're very grateful and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.